The gunshot echoed through Wolf's Crossing jail like thunder on a clear day. But Sheriff Ellis Crane's finger hadn't touched the trigger. The sound came from his boot heel striking the wooden floor as he circled the kneeling woman like a vulture sizing up carrion. Nora Bellamy pressed her knees deeper into the cold planks, clutching torn burlap against her bare skin. At 28, she'd scrubbed laundry and balanced ledgers her whole adult life, never imagining she'd crouch half-naked in a frontier jail while a corrupt lawman savored her humiliation. Theft and indecency. Crane announced to the empty cell block, his weathered face twisted with false righteousness. Caught red-handed behind Murphy's saloon, wasn't you, girl? Nora's lips moved soundlessly. The real crime had nothing to do with theft. 3 nights ago, she'd stayed late at Gray Butte Mine checking payroll discrepancies after miners complained about short wages. Through cracked shutters, she'd witnessed Crane and mine owner Silas Kincaid counting stacks of money while discussing ghost workers and insurance accidents that hadn't happened yet. The heavy door creaked. Deputy Tommy Hart shoved another prisoner inside a tall cowhand with sun-weathered skin and a twisted pink scar covering his right hand. Jasper Boone, 35, had come to town seeking overdue wages and found a saloon fight instead. His sharp blue eyes took in Nora's condition immediately. Something dark flickered across his face, recognition of injustice that struck deep. 5 years ago, his 19-year-old brother Luke had died during what the official report called an accidental drowning. But Jasper had never believed that story, and guilt over not being there when Luke needed him most had driven him to wander the frontier ever since. "Mind your business, cowboy," Crane warned, noticing Jasper's attention. But Jasper saw Luke in every victim of the town's corruption. This time, he wouldn't stand by. "She's freezing," Jasper said quietly. "Give her a blanket." Crane's hand dropped to his gun. "I said mind your business. Just a blanket, that's all." The moment stretched taut. Nora whispered, "Help," so softly only Jasper heard, and he made his choice. When Crane shoved him hard, Jasper grabbed a wooden chair with his good left hand, his burned right couldn't grip properly, and swung it wide, catching both lawmen off guard. They stumbled backward into a water barrel that toppled with a tremendous crash. Jasper wrapped his coat around Nora. "Can you run?" She nodded through chattering teeth. They burst through the back door as Crane's gun roared behind them, the bullet splintering wood an inches from Jasper's head. In the stable, they dove into a hay cart, just as Deputy Hart appeared in the doorway. For a heartbeat, Jasper thought they were caught. But Hart raised his hand quickly and turned away. Crane's second shot cracked the cart's wheel, sending splinters flying as they careened toward town's edge. The damaged wheel wobbled dangerously, but they disappeared into dusk, leaving Wolf's Crossing behind. "Tell me what you saw," Jasper said over the cart's rattling. As their broken transport limped toward the prairie, Nora painted a picture of fraud that ran deeper than simple theft. Ghost workers collected wages months after dying in accidents. Insurance claims were filed for equipment that was never damaged. And somewhere in that web of lies, a planned explosion would kill real miners to cover tracks and collect blood money. They were no longer just fugitives. They'd become the only witnesses to corruption that would claim more lives unless someone stopped it. Wolf's Crossing existed where civilization met wilderness, perched on the edge of silver country, like a town built on quicksand. The Gray Butte Mine had brought wealth to some and misery to many, its silver veins running through the earth, like arteries of both hope and greed. Dr. May Hollister had treated every form of frontier violence in her 53 years. In her cluttered office above the general store, she kept 2 sets of records, official ones Sheriff Crane sometimes reviewed, and private notes documenting suspicious deaths and covered-up injuries. May had learned that truth was a luxury few could afford to speak aloud in Wolf's Crossing. At the telegraph office, Abigail Sloan managed communications with the precision of a banker and the skepticism of a judge. The 42-year-old widow had buried her husband 5 years ago, a mining engineer, who died in what officials called a tunnel collapse, though he'd been found with a suspicious head wound that didn't match the fallen rocks around him. Since then, Abigail had developed a sharp eye for inconsistencies and a careful way of processing information that served her clients well. What no one in Wolf's Crossing knew was that Abigail's late husband, Thomas Sloan, had been on the verge of exposing safety violations at Grey Butte Mine when he died. Silas Kincaid had made his widow a deal generous monthly payments from a mining safety fund in exchange for her discretion about certain communications that might pass through her telegraph office. Abigail told herself she was protecting Thomas's memory. His reputation as an engineer would be ruined if anyone learned he'd been planning to blow the whistle on his employers. The payments had allowed her to maintain Thomas's medical treatments in his final months and give him a proper burial. Now, 5 years later, those same payments funded her carefully maintained independence and the medicine her sister needed in Denver. Abigail had convinced herself she was simply being practical, that one woman couldn't fight an entire corrupt system. But maintaining that balance required constant vigilance. Every telegram that mentioned mining accidents, federal investigations, or territorial marshals passed through her careful review before transmission. Some messages were delayed for technical difficulties. Others were subtly altered dates, changed names, misspelled crucial words omitted. It was easy to blame the primitive nature of frontier communications. 17-year-old Emmett Boone carried family expectations and the weight of easy temptation. Jasper's nephew worked odd jobs around town, but had begun running messages for Rhett Coulter, who served double duty as Kincaid's mine foreman and leader of a cattle rustling operation that provided cash for bribes and equipment. Each person moved through Wolf's Crossing like chess pieces on a board controlled by unseen hands. May treated miners injured by cost-cutting safety measures. Abigail processed Kincaid's communications while maintaining her careful neutrality. Emmett carried messages between criminal contacts, earning coins that felt increasingly heavy with guilt. Sheriff Crane ruled through fear distributed with surgical precision. His deputy Tommy Hart remembered when Wolf's Crossing had different leadership before Kincaid's wealth, and Crane's brutality twisted everything. Hart's conscience bothered him daily, but threats against his younger sister Annie kept him in line. Into this web rode Jasper Boone, seeking nothing more than earned wages. His burned right hand served as constant reminder that saving others sometimes costs more than a person could afford. The injury had weakened his grip and shooting hand, forcing him to rely on his left for skills that kept him alive on the range. As shadows lengthened outside the jailhouse, each character prepared for a drama that would expose Wolf's Crossing's rot and force them all to choose between safety and justice, silence and truth. Night fell across the prairie like a shroud, bringing distant hoofbeats and voices raised in anger. Sheriff Crane had assembled his hunting party, 6 armed men, riding hard under starlight, following tracks in dust that told the story of desperate flight. Their stolen mule labored north toward broken country, where rocky outcrops might provide shelter. Nora clung to the cart's side, wrapped in Jasper's coat, her voice hoarse but determined as she spoke over rattling wheels. "The mine books show payments to dead men," she said. "Workers who died months ago still drawing wages. Others' names I'd never seen getting full pay but never showing for work. Ghost workers," Jasper said grimly, working reins with his left hand while his burned right throbbed. "How many?" "Dozens, maybe more." Her fever-bright eyes stayed sharp with urgency. "But that's not the worst of it. I heard them talking about something called the blast bill. They're planning to blow part of the mine and claim it was an accident. Insurance money enough to make them rich." Wind began picking up, carrying dust and the scent of approaching weather. Within minutes, what had been a clear night transformed into chaos as a prairie storm descended with nature's full fury. Rain fell in sheets that turned dust to mud and visibility to mere yards. The mule balked, refusing to move, as lightning cracked overhead. The cart's damaged wheel chose that moment to surrender completely, spilling them onto hard ground in a tangle of limbs and splintered wood. "Can't see nothing in this," Jasper shouted over thunder. But waiting wasn't an option. Through the storm's chaos, voices approached Crane's posse, following tracks before the weather erased them. A rider emerged from the rain, like a specter bandana covering his face rifle ready. "Found something," the man called back. Jasper's cattleman instincts took over. His left hand found his rope, casting a loop that settled around the rider's weapon. A sharp jerk sent the rifle spinning into darkness and pulled the man from his saddle. The rider scrambled up, clawing for his backup pistol. His shot went wide in the driving rain, but close enough that Jasper felt the bullet's heat graze his ribs. Pain shot through his injured right hand fingers, going completely numb. "This way." Nora grabbed his left arm, pulling toward a low bank that offered the only cover. They dove behind the earthwork as more shots erupted. Bullets whined overhead, striking packed earth and sending up spurts that mixed with swirling rain. Jasper pressed against the bank, breathing hard. His right hand hung useless, and the bullet graze bled steadily through his torn shirt. "How many?" Nora whispered. 5 or 6, maybe more in the storm." 20 minutes later, the rain began to subside, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by distant horses and shouted commands as the posse regrouped. Dawn would expose them to renewed pursuit. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles north," Jasper said quietly. "Abandoned homestead. If we can reach it before they pick up our trail." They picked their way through settling rain, avoiding obvious tracks, while Nora's bare feet left bloody prints on rocky ground. The shack's roof was mostly intact, its single room containing furniture remnants left by some long-gone family's frontier dream. Jasper barricaded the door with a broken table and started a small fire using his last match and chair scraps. The flame provided warmth and light to examine their injuries. His ribs were bruised and bloody where the bullet had grazed his right hand, nearly useless with nerve damage. Nora's condition was worse than she'd admitted. Exposure terror and exhaustion had left her shaking with fever. She huddled near the fire teeth, chattering as chills swept through her. "They called it the blast bill," she whispered through dry lips. "Their plan to destroy part of the mine and claim insurance. I heard Kincaid say it would solve all their problems, get rid of evidence, and make them rich." Jasper tore shirt strips to bandage wounds, wincing as he worked one-handed. "When? Soon. Days, maybe less." Her eyes burned with urgency despite fever. All those miners working deep shifts don't know they're supposed to die for Kincaid's profit. As dawn approached, Jasper made a dangerous decision. He left a coded message at a nearby fence post, a system he and Emmett had developed for ranch work. The message was simple: "Need help. East Meadow at sunrise. Come alone. JB." If Emmett found it and could help, they might have a chance to return to town with evidence. If Crane found it first, or if Emmett had fallen too far under Coulter's influence, they'd walk into a trap. As sunlight pierced the storm clouds, they prepared to discover which fate awaited them. Emmett appeared at the East Meadow, leading a sturdy bay horse, but 3 riders hung back in the trees, Coulter's men keeping watch. The animal bore the Circle C brand, marking it as stolen from local ranchers. "Uncle Jasper," Emmett called cautiously. "You took this horse," Jasper said without preamble. The boy's face flushed. "Coulter said it was fair wages for work done. Rustling isn't work, boy. It's a fast road to a hanging tree." Before Emmett could respond, the distant riders spurred forward. The lead man was Pete Garner, one of Coulter's lieutenants, with a reputation for enjoying violence. "Now that's our property, Boone," Garner shouted. "And your nephew belongs to us now, seeing how he owes for gear." The fight erupted near a muddy ford where Willow Creek crossed the trail. Garner dismounted with a length of chain, swinging it in vicious arcs. Jasper ducked the first swing, but couldn't avoid the backhand that caught his shoulder, spinning him into shallow water. His burned right hand couldn't grip his rope. When he tried to defend himself, the damaged fingers simply wouldn't close around leather. Garner pressed his advantage, landing a punch that split Jasper's lip and sent him down into the creek bed. To Uncle Jasper. Emmett's shout was followed by the sound of wood striking flesh as the boy swung a broken fence rail like a club, catching Garner's second man across the skull and dropping him unconscious into the mud. Nora spotted the third rustler circling to flank them. Behind you, Jasper rolled sideways in the creek water cold, shocking his system to alertness. His left hand found a fist-sized rock, hurling it with desperate accuracy. It struck the mounted rifleman in the chest, spoiling his shot. The bullet spanged off a boulder, sending stone chips flying. "We go now." Nora gasped, fever-pale but sharp-eyed. They mounted the stolen horse, 3 riders on an animal, meant for one requiring careful balance to avoid exhaustion. Behind them, Garner's curses followed across the prairie. The ride back used hidden valleys and game trails that kept them off main roads. Emmett proved valuable as a guide, knowing every creek crossing from his message running for Coulter's operation. But his knowledge came with disturbing revelations about how deeply the rustling connected to mine corruption. Coulter takes orders from Kincaid. Emmett admitted as they watered the horse at a secluded spring. The rustling money pays for bribes and equipment at the mine. But there's something else. He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Coulter's been asking about you, Uncle Jasper. About what happened to Luke 5 years ago." Jasper's blood turned cold. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you ever learned the truth about how he died. Whether you might start asking questions if something reminded you of it." The implications hit like a physical blow. Luke's death hadn't been a random tragedy. Somehow it connected to the current conspiracy, which meant his brother might have stumbled onto earlier fraud attempts. "They killed Luke," Jasper said quietly. It wasn't a question. Emmett nodded miserably. "I think so. Coulter laughed about it once, said some people should mind their own business." By the time they reached Wolf's Crossing's outskirts, smoke rose from chimneys and the town began its daily business. But beneath the surface normalcy, Crane would be organizing a manhunt that made their earlier pursuit look gentle. Dr. May's office above the general store became their sanctuary. May took one look at Jasper's injuries and Nora's fever-flushed face before ushering them inside and barricading the door. "Crane's got half the town hunting you two," she said without preamble, cleaning Jasper's wounds with alcohol that burned like liquid fire. "Claims you assaulted an officer and helped a prisoner escape. Of course, he isn't mentioning what condition that prisoner was in." May's supplies were practical rather than luxurious. She stitched Jasper's bullet graze with horsehair thread and provided Nora with a simple cotton dress and willow bark tea to reduce fever. "There's something else you need to see," May said after finishing medical work. She produced a worn leather journal from a hidden compartment in her desk. "This is my private record of deaths that don't match the official reports Crane files with the county." She opened to a page dated 5 years earlier. "Male, approximately 19 years, gunshot wound to chest, recovered from Serpent Fork. Bullet entry consistent with .45 caliber pistol fired at close range. Official cause of death listed as drowning, but evidence suggests victim was shot first." Jasper stared at the entry hands, trembling. "Luke was murdered. That's what the evidence showed," May said quietly. "But Crane's official report said accidental drowning, no mention of the gunshot. I kept the bullet I dug from his chest if you want it." The revelation transformed Jasper's grief into something harder and more dangerous. Luke hadn't simply drowned while fleeing, he'd been executed to keep quiet about something he discovered. Their next stop was the telegraph office. Abigail Sloane listened with apparent attention as Nora described ghost workers and the planned mine explosion, her fingers drumming thoughtfully on her desk. "You want me telegraphing federal authorities based on overheard conversations and missing payroll," Abigail said when they finished. "I need more. Numbers, dates, proof that would stand up in court." The ledger, Nora said. Kincaid keeps the real books in his mine office. There's a false bottom in his desk drawer. I saw him hide papers there when I was cleaning. Getting into that office won't be easy, Jasper noted. It's right in the mine complex with guards and workers everywhere. Not at night. Emmett spoke up. Coulter's had me running messages there after dark. I know how to get in through the rail yard over the rooftops. The night guards mostly stay by the mine entrance, not the office building. Abigail's expression remained skeptical, but she nodded slowly. Bring me solid evidence, names, amounts, dates, and I'll wire Marshal Webb in the territorial capital. He's investigating mining fraud across 3 territories. But if you're wrong or running some kind of con, I'll turn you over to Crane myself. What none of them could see was the shadow that crossed Abigail's face as they left not skepticism, but the careful calculation of someone balancing multiple loyalties. As soon as they were gone, she composed 2 telegrams. One went to Marshal Webb as promised, but with deliberately vague language that would delay any immediate response. The other went to a coded address in Denver, a message that would eventually reach Silas Kincaid through intermediaries. Situation developing, stop. The second telegram read, package may be compromised, stop. Recommend immediate action, stop. That night, fog rolled from the river, muffling the sounds of the sleeping town, as Jasper and Nora made their way through the rail yard toward the mine complex. Emmett's directions proved accurate. Connected rooftops provided a path that avoided the main guards, though every step risked discovery. The mine office was solid brick, reflecting Kincaid's prosperity and attention to security. But frontier locks were designed for casual thieves, not determined investigators with time and tools. Nora used a screwdriver from May's medical kit to pry open the desk drawer's false bottom, revealing a leather portfolio containing the evidence they desperately needed. The ledger pages told stories of systematic fraud that exceeded Nora's worst suspicions. Ghost workers numbered in the dozens, with wages paid to men who died in previous accidents or never existed at all. Insurance claims had been filed for greatly exaggerated or completely fabricated equipment losses and worker injuries. The total theft amounted to tens of thousands of dollars a fortune on the frontier. But it was a small personal item tucked between the ledger pages that struck Jasper like a physical blow, a silver pocket watch engraved LB, with a small dent he remembered from childhood. Luke's watch, their father's gift on his 16th birthday. Why would Kincaid have Luke's watch? Nora whispered as footsteps approached outside. Jasper's mind raced through the implications. The watch proved Luke's death was connected to the mine conspiracy, but raised more questions than answers. Had Luke discovered earlier fraud been killed to keep quiet? Why had Kincaid kept the watch as some kind of trophy? They escaped through the same rooftop route, but not before being spotted by a guard who raised an alarm that echoed across the mine complex. Running through fog-shrouded streets toward their rendezvous with Abigail, Jasper clutched the stolen ledger and his brother's watch, knowing they had evidence of the conspiracy, but still lacked the full truth about Luke's death. At the telegraph office, Abigail examined the ledger pages with an accountant's thoroughness. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she read the fraudulent entries and calculated the scope of the theft. "This is enough," she said finally. "I'll wire Marshal Webb tonight." But as she spoke, her eyes lingered on Luke's pocket watch, with something that might have been recognition or guilt. She opened her desk drawer, pulling out a small packet of photographic plates. "I commissioned a traveling photographer during the last payday," she explained. "I suspected there might be irregularities worth documenting." The plates held to lamplight revealed images of men lined up to collect wages from the mine paymaster. But some faces appeared twice in different parts of the line, while others looked suspiciously similar hired actors posing as different workers to collect multiple pay envelopes. "A visual proof of the ghost worker scheme," Abigail said with satisfaction. These plates combined with your ledger pages should convince Marshal Webb to launch a full investigation. But as she prepared to send the telegram that would bring federal law enforcement to Wolf's Crossing, a new complication emerged. Lydia Frost, who owned the town's largest saloon, burst through the office door with news that turned their victory into a desperate race against time. Kincaid's moving up his timeline. She gasped, having run from the saloon district. I overheard him talking to Crane. They're blowing the west shaft tomorrow night. Something about you finding the ledger has them spooked. They want to collect the insurance and disappear before any federal marshals arrive. The mine explosion that would kill dozens of innocent workers was no longer a distant threat. It was less than 24 hours away. And somewhere in Wolf's Crossing's darkness, Crane was organizing a final manhunt that would either capture them before they could warn the miners or silence them permanently to protect the exposed secrets. What they didn't know was that Abigail had already sent her coded warning to Kincaid. The telegraph operator sat in her chair, watching their desperate preparations with the careful expression of someone who'd made her choice long ago and was now committed to seeing it through regardless of the cost. Dawn brought gray clouds that seemed to mirror the secrets pressing down on Wolf's Crossing. In Dr. May's office, they spread the stolen ledger across her examination table like evidence for a trial that might never come. Jasper studied the fraudulent entries with the methodical attention of a man used to tracking brands and bloodlines. Each ghost worker had a name, a fictional backstory, and a payment schedule that had been maintained for months or years. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, not just theft, but murder disguised as industrial accidents. Look at these dates. Nora set her finger tracing columns of entries. The fever had broken during the night, leaving her weak but clear-headed. Every time there was a real mining accident that killed workers, Kincaid added 2 or 3 ghost workers to the payroll. He's been using actual deaths to cover fake ones. May nodded grimly, reading over their shoulders. Matches what I've seen in my medical records. After every accident, Crane would pressure me to keep death certificates simple: industrial accident, equipment failure, nothing that would raise questions with insurance investigators. But Jasper's discovery transformed their understanding from financial fraud to something far more personal and sinister. Attached to one ledger page was a folded document bearing Crane's official seal, a report dated 5 years earlier, describing Luke Boone's death. Pursuit concluded at Serpent Fork Crossing. The report read in Crane's distinctive handwriting. Suspect fled into river during chase. No shots fired. Body recovered the following morning. Death by drowning determined by sheriff's investigation. Jasper compared this official report to May's private medical record, his hands shaking as the full scope of the deception became clear. Crane didn't just fail to save Luke, he shot him deliberately, then lied in his report. May's expression darkened as she pulled out another item she'd saved for the right moment. I kept this from Luke's body, she said quietly, producing a deformed lead bullet. Came from a .45 caliber pistol fired at close range. Same type of gun Crane carries. The revelation hit Jasper like a physical blow, transforming his grief and guilt into something far more dangerous: certain knowledge that his brother had been murdered by the man sworn to protect the town. Luke hadn't drowned while fleeing minor theft charges. He'd been executed to keep quiet about fraud discoveries. Why keep Luke's watch? Nora asked, handling the silver timepiece with careful reverence. Insurance, May said with the bitter wisdom of someone who'd seen too much. If questions ever came up about Luke's death, Kincaid could produce the watch as evidence that the boy was stealing from the mine. A dead thief can't defend himself or contradict official reports. Emmett, who'd been quietly listening, suddenly went pale. Uncle Jasper, there's something else. Something Coulter told me about Luke. What? Coulter said Luke had been asking questions around town about mine safety, talking to workers about accidents that didn't seem right. He was trying to document the dangers, maybe write a letter to territorial authorities. Coulter laughed about it, said the boy should have minded his own business. The final puzzle piece clicked into place with devastating clarity. Luke hadn't stumbled onto the conspiracy by accident. He'd been investigating deliberately, probably motivated by the same sense of justice that now drove Jasper. The minor theft charge that supposedly led to the fatal chase had been a fabrication, a pretext to eliminate a young man who was asking too many dangerous questions. He died because he tried to do what we're doing now. Jasper said, his voice hollow with the weight of understanding. And I spent 5 years blaming myself for not being there to save him, when the truth is, no one could have saved him from a sheriff's bullet. The revelation transformed Jasper's motivation from a general desire for justice to something far more personal and dangerous. He was no longer just trying to expose a fraud conspiracy. He was seeking justice for his brother's murder committed by the very man who was supposed to represent law and order. But the revelation also brought clarity to their current situation. If Crane had killed Luke to protect the conspiracy 5 years ago, he would definitely kill Jasper and Nora to protect it now. The sheriff wasn't just corrupt, he was a murderer who would stop at nothing to keep his crimes hidden. We need to move fast, May said, reading the dangerous shift in Jasper's expression. If Crane realizes you've connected Luke's death to the current situation, he'll stop trying to capture you alive. This becomes a hunt to the death. As if summoned by her words, Deputy Hart appeared at May's back door, his young face flushed with exertion and fear. But instead of arresting them, he brought news that complicated their situation even further. Crane knows you have the ledger, Hart said without preamble. He's organizing every man he can trust to hunt you down, promised $100 to whoever brings you in. But there's something else he's moving the mine explosion up to tonight. Kincaid's spooked about federal investigators. They want to collect the insurance and get out before Marshal Webb arrives. The timeline that had seemed desperate before now became impossible. They had mere hours to warn the miners, gather enough evidence to convince federal authorities, and survive long enough to see justice done. Standing between them and success was a corrupt sheriff who'd already committed murder once and wouldn't hesitate to do so again. As Hart prepared to leave, he turned back with final information that would prove crucial in the coming hours. Crane's been bragging around town about what a good shot he is, how he never missed a target when it mattered. He specifically mentioned something about teaching that Boone boy to swim 5 years ago. I think he's planning to kill you the same way he killed Luke, make it look like an accident. But they never made it to their planned meeting with Abigail. As they prepared to leave May's office, the telegraph operator herself appeared in the doorway, not with news of Marshal Webb's response, but with Sheriff Crane and 2 armed deputies flanking her. "I'm sorry," Abigail said, though her voice carried no emotion at all. But some secrets are too dangerous to expose. The moment stretched like a taut wire as Jasper processed what he was seeing. Abigail Sloane stood in May's doorway with Crane's deputies flanking her, no longer the helpful ally who'd promised to contact federal authorities, but the architect of their downfall. "You set us up?" Nora whispered, her face pale with understanding. "I tried to warn you off," Abigail replied, her voice steady but hollow. "When you first came to me with your suspicions, I hoped you'd take the hint and leave town. But you were too stubborn, too determined to dig up truths that are better left buried." Crane stepped forward, his weathered face split by a cruel smile. "Mrs. Sloane's been keeping me informed of your activities from the beginning. Every plan, every move, every piece of evidence you thought you were gathering in secret." He gestured to the ledger pages spread across May's examination table. "She even told me when you'd be breaking into Kincaid's office." "But why?" Jasper demanded, his left hand moving instinctively toward his gun before Crane's deputies raised their rifles. Abigail's composed mask cracked for just a moment, revealing something desperate beneath. "My husband didn't die in a mining accident," she said quietly. Thomas was murdered because he was going to expose safety violations at Gray Butte. Kincaid made me a deal monthly payments to keep quiet about certain communications in exchange for ensuring Thomas's reputation remained intact. Blood money, May said with disgust. Practical money, Abigail corrected sharply. Money that paid for Thomas's medicine in his final months, money that's kept my sister alive in Denver. Money that's allowed me to maintain some independence in this godforsaken town. You think I wanted to be complicit in this? You think I enjoyed watching minors die while their families got pennies in compensation? Her voice grew harder, more brittle. But I learned something you haven't figured out yet. One person can't fight an entire corrupt system. The best you can do is protect the people you love and try to minimize the damage by helping Crane murder more innocent people. Nora shot back. By preventing a war that would destroy this entire town, Abigail replied. If federal marshals come here, if this conspiracy gets exposed, every family in Wolf's Crossing suffers. The mine closes, the railroad moves, its depot businesses fail. Hundreds of people lose everything they've worked for because you two couldn't leave well enough alone. Jasper understood now why Abigail's telegrams to Marshal Webb had been deliberately vague, why their messages had been delayed or altered. She'd been buying Kincaid time to cover his tracks, while feeding Crane information about their movements. Where's the real evidence? Crane demanded, moving closer to the examination table. The ledger pages here don't show everything. What else did you take from Kincaid's safe? When neither Jasper nor Nora answered, Crane nodded to his deputies. One of them grabbed Emmett, pressing a gun to the boy's temple. The boy dies unless you hand over everything, Crane said matter-of-factly. And don't think about lying. Mrs. Sloane's already told me there were more documents than what you're showing. Nora's hand moved to the waterproof pouch hidden beneath her dress, where she'd secured the most damaging evidence. But before she could decide whether to surrender it, Deputy Hart appeared in May's back window, signaling frantically. Marshal Webb's in town. Hart mouthed silently. Coming this way. Abigail saw Hart's warning, and her face went white. You sent for Webb yourself, she said to May, understanding flooding her voice. You never trusted us to handle this alone. May's expression was grimly satisfied. Sent a telegram yesterday morning, right after treating their wounds. Figured we'd need federal backup no matter how this played out. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the street outside. Crane's face darkened with rage as he realized his carefully laid trap was about to be sprung by the very authority he'd been trying to avoid. Change of plans. He snarled, grabbing Nora by the arm. We're going to the mine right now. Mrs. Sloane, you tell the marshal these folks never came to see you. Hart, you keep your mouth shut if you want your sister staying healthy. But as they prepared to leave, Abigail made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a Colt revolver that she pointed directly at Crane's chest. No, she said simply. This ends here. The sheriff laughed. You won't shoot me. Too much to lose if you do. Maybe. Abigail agreed. But I won't let you kill them the way you killed my husband. Thomas died because he tried to do the right thing. And I've spent 5 years telling myself it was better to be practical than dead. But looking at these young people willing to risk everything for justice, I can't keep pretending that cowardice is wisdom. Her hand was steady as she kept the gun trained on Crane. Drop your weapons, all of you. The standoff stretched taut until Marshal Webb's voice cut through the tension from outside May's office. This is Federal Marshal Webb. I'm looking for Dr. May Hollister and anyone who might have information about mining fraud in this district. Be not a lawmen. Unust. Crane's face twisted with desperate calculation. In one quick motion, he shoved Emmett toward Abigail's gun and dove toward the back door, his deputies following. The office erupted in chaos as everyone tried to avoid shooting the boy while pursuing the fleeing lawmen. But Crane's escape route led directly into the mine complex, where the explosive charges were already set and waiting. The corrupt sheriff had inadvertently trapped himself in the very location where he'd planned to commit his final murders. As Marshal Webb entered May's office with 2 federal deputies, Jasper grabbed the evidence portfolio and looked toward the mine complex visible through the window. "He's heading for Gray Butte," Jasper said, "and he's got enough dynamite planted there to bring down half the mountain." The final confrontation was about to begin. Not in the streets of Wolf's Crossing, but in the dark tunnels where Luke had first stumbled onto the conspiracy that cost him his life. Gray Butte Mine rose from the prairie like a monument to human ambition and greed, its wooden headframe silhouetted against storm clouds that promised a violent end to an already brutal day. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Marshal Webb's party approached the complex, following fresh tracks in the mud where Crane and his men had fled. "How many workers are down there?" Webb asked as they took cover behind a supply shed. "Day shift ended hours ago," May replied, checking her medical bag. "But Kincaid sometimes keeps crews working late when he's behind on quotas. Could be a dozen men in the deeper shafts." Lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes, abandoned equipment scattered around the mine entrance mules, penned nearby, stamping nervously at the approaching storm, and the dark shaft mouth that had claimed so many lives through accidents that were anything but accidental. Jasper studied the mine complex with the methodical attention of a man planning a cattle drive through dangerous territory. "There are 3 main entrances," he said. "West shaft goes deepest, that's where they'd plant charges for maximum effect. North tunnel connects to the equipment areas. East slope is mostly played out, but it might give us a way in without being spotted." "This is federal business now," Webb said firmly. "I appreciate your help, but I can't ask civilians to." "Luke died in those tunnels," Jasper interrupted. "Not literally, but his investigation started there. I'm going in whether you approve or not." Webb studied the younger man's face and recognized something he'd seen in his own mirror during years of chasing outlaws across impossible terrain. "All right. But we do this my way with military precision. No heroics, no personal vendettas. We get the miners out, we get Crane, and we do it without anyone else dying." The plan they developed was simple, but dangerous. Webb and his deputies would enter through the main shaft, making enough noise to draw Crane's attention. Meanwhile, Jasper and Hart would use the abandoned east tunnel to reach the workers and warn them about the explosives. Nora, despite her protests, would remain with May and Abigail to tend any wounded and coordinate with additional federal agents expected from the territorial capital. But as they prepared to enter the mine, Abigail pulled Jasper aside. "There's something else you need to know," she said quietly. "About Luke's death. I was the one who sent the telegram about his investigation to my contact in Denver. I thought if I warned them, they might just scare him off instead of killing him." Jasper's face darkened. "You got my brother murdered. I got him murdered by trying to save him," Abigail replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The telegram I sent said he was asking dangerous questions and should be handled carefully. I never imagined they'd interpret that as permission to kill him. I've carried that guilt for 5 years, telling myself I was just trying to protect everyone." The admission hit Jasper like a physical blow, but there was no time to process the implications. Storm clouds were building toward a downpour that would complicate their rescue operation, and every minute they delayed increased the risk of Crane detonating his charges out of spite. "We settle this after," Jasper said grimly, then followed Hart toward the east tunnel entrance. The abandoned shaft stretched into darkness, like the throat of some massive beast. Their lantern cast dancing shadows on wooden support beams that creaked ominously with each step deeper into the mountain. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the electrical tension of the approaching storm, and something else, the acrid smell of dynamite fuses already burning somewhere in the depths. "How much time do you think we have?" Hart whispered as they navigated around a collapsed section of tunnel. Not enough. Jasper replied, his left hand gripping the rope they'd brought, while his burned right hung nearly useless at his side. Crane's got nothing left to lose now. He'll light those charges the moment he feels trapped. They reached a junction where the east tunnel connected to the main shaft system. Voices echoed from below, miners who'd been kept late for some last-minute work, unaware that their employer planned to murder them for insurance money. But mixed with the workers' voices was another sound that made Jasper's blood run cold. Crane's distinctive laugh, accompanied by the unmistakable hiss of burning fuses. He's already started the countdown. Hart set his face pale in the lantern light. They had minutes, maybe less, before the charges exploded. The miners were scattered through multiple levels of the shaft system, some so deep that reaching them and getting them to safety seemed impossible. But Jasper had spent years moving cattle through impossible terrain under desperate conditions, and he applied those same skills to human rescue. "You take the middle level," he told Hart. "Get them moving toward the main entrance where Webb can guide them out. I'll go deeper, try to reach anyone working the lower tunnels." Hart nodded and disappeared into the branching tunnel system, while Jasper continued his descent into the mountain's bowels. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Water dripped from the ceiling, timbers groaned under enormous pressure, and the air itself seemed thick enough to cut with a knife. He found them in the deepest working tunnel. 4 miners drilling into a silver vein, and their lanterns creating a small circle of light in the vast darkness. They looked up in surprise as Jasper appeared covered in mud and moving with desperate urgency. "Mine's been rigged to blow," he said without preamble. "We have maybe 5 minutes to get out." To their credit, the miners didn't waste time with questions. Frontier work bred men who understood that survival often depended on quick decisions and immediate action. They dropped their tools and followed Jasper toward the surface, moving as fast as the treacherous footing allowed. But as they climbed through the tunnel system, the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere above them. Webb had found Crane, and the corrupt sheriff was making his final stand in the very mine he'd planned to destroy. The gunfight raged through multiple levels of the shaft muzzle flashes, creating a deadly light show in the darkness. Crane had positioned himself near the main explosive charges, using them as both weapon and shield. No one could shoot at him without risking the very explosion they were trying to prevent. "Give it up, Crane." Webb's voice echoed through the tunnels. "There's nowhere left to run." Maybe not. Crane's response came from somewhere deeper in the mine. "But I'm not going to prison for doing what needed doing." This town was chaos before Kincaid brought order. Luke Boone was just the first fool who couldn't understand that progress requires sacrifice. His words were punctuated by more gunfire, but also by another sound that sent ice through Jasper's veins, the accelerating hiss of fuses burning toward their deadly conclusion. Crane wasn't just making a last stand. He was ensuring that his enemies would die with him in the explosion. Jasper reached the main tunnel system just as the last of the miners emerged into the storm-lashed night. Rain was falling in sheets, now turning the mine yard into a muddy battlefield, where lanterns cast ghostly shadows and federal agents shouted orders over the thunder. But the rescue was far from complete. Webb and his deputies were still trapped inside, with Crane caught in a deadly game where any misstep could trigger an explosion that would bury them all under tons of rock and timber. "How long on those fuses?" May called out as she helped treat a miner who'd been injured during the hasty evacuation. "No, not long enough," Jasper replied, grabbing a coil of rope and heading back toward the mine entrance. "I'm going after them." "You can't." Nora caught his arm. "It's suicide." "So is leaving them down there," Jasper replied. "And I've got 5 years of guilt about Luke to make up for. This time I'm not running away when people need help." He kissed her quickly, fiercely, then disappeared into the mine shaft as thunder crashed overhead and rain continued to fall on the Gray Butte complex, washing away the blood and mud of years of corruption and preparing the ground for whatever justice might grow from the violence about to unfold in the mountain's depths. The mine shaft descended into hell itself, each level deeper than the last, each breath more difficult to draw. Jasper's lantern cast a small circle of light that seemed pitiful against the vast darkness surrounding him. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, mixing with his sweat and the blood from reopened wounds. Gunfire echoed from somewhere below, accompanied by Crane's voice, raised in desperate defiance. "You think you can just waltz in here and destroy what we built? This mine feeds half the territory those ghost workers you're so worried about paid for schools and churches and decent roads." Webb's response was calm, professional. "They also paid for Murder Crane. Luke, Boone, Thomas Sloan, how many others? Not necessary sacrifices." Crane's laugh held an edge of madness. "You federal boys sit in your offices making laws, but we live in the real world. Sometimes good people have to die so better things can happen." Jasper followed the voices deeper into the mine, his left hand trailing along the support timbers while his useless right arm hung at his side. The fuses hissing grew louder, with each step a deadly countdown that would end with enough dynamite to bring down the entire mountain. He found them in the lowest working level, where the silver vein ran deepest and the air was so thick it was like breathing soup. Webb and one deputy had taken cover behind an ore cart, while Crane crouched near the main explosive cache, his gun trained on the burning fuses. The corrupt sheriff's face was wild with desperate determination. "One more step and I cut these fuses short," Crane warned. "We all die together, but at least I take you federal bastards with me. Think about the miners still up there," Webb called back. "Think about your deputy Hart, about all the innocent people who'll die if you set off those charges." "Innocent," Crane spat. "Hart's been feeding you information for weeks, and those miners knew the risks when they took the job. Death's part of mining, always has been." Jasper studied the scene from the tunnel entrance, calculating angles and distances. Crane was positioned behind a cluster of wooden crates that contained enough dynamite to excavate a small canyon. The fuses ran from the explosive cache through a series of support tunnels designed to bring down multiple levels of the mine simultaneously. But Jasper's years of ranch work had taught him to see things others missed. The way Crane was positioned, the angle of his gun, and the location of the fuses, it all told a story of a man who'd made a fatal tactical error. Moving with the careful precision of a cattleman approaching a dangerous bull, Jasper worked his way around the chamber's perimeter. His burned right hand couldn't grip his rope, but his left was steady and sure as he found handholds in the rough rock wall. The plan that formed in his mind was simple, desperate, and probably suicidal. But it was the only chance any of them had. Crane was so focused on the federal agents in front of him that he never saw Jasper moving through the shadows above. When the rancher dropped from a ledge 20 feet overhead, his boots caught Crane square in the shoulders, sending both men tumbling across the rocky floor. The impact knocked Crane's gun away and sent him rolling toward the burning fuses. For a terrifying moment, it looked like the sheriff would fall directly onto the explosive charges. But Jasper's left hand shot out, grabbing Crane's belt and hauling him back from the deadly cache. "Get the fuses," Jasper shouted to Webb as he grappled with Crane on the cavern floor. "Cut them before—" Crane's elbow caught him in the ribs, right where the bullet had grazed him days earlier. Pain exploded through his chest, and his grip loosened enough for the sheriff to break free. Crane scrambled toward his fallen gun, his face twisted with murderous rage. "Should have minded your own business, just like your brother." The words triggered something primal in Jasper, a fury that had been building for 5 years of guilt and grief. His left fist caught Crane in the jaw with the force of all that accumulated rage, spinning the sheriff around and sending him crashing into the ore cart. Meanwhile, Webb and his deputy were frantically cutting fuses with their knives, racing against time. As the flames ate through waxed cord toward the explosive charges, some of the fuses were too short to reach safely, forcing them to stamp out flames with their boots while praying the charges wouldn't detonate from the impact. Got the main ones, Webb called out. But there might be backup fuses we can't see. As if summoned by his words, smaller explosions began echoing through the mineshaft charges that Crane had placed as insurance designed to collapse tunnels and trap anyone who tried to escape. The mountain itself seemed to groan as support structures failed and tons of rock shifted overhead. "The whole thing's coming down," the deputy shouted over the rumbling. "We need out now." But Crane had one final play. As Jasper tried to pull him toward the exit, the corrupt sheriff produced a derringer from his boot, pressing it against Jasper's ribs. "You want to be a hero like your brother?" Crane snarled. "Heroes die young in this country." The small pistol cracked like a whip in the confined space. Jasper felt fire tear through his side, spinning him away from Crane and sending him crashing into the tunnel wall. Blood spread across his shirt as he slumped to the cavern floor, his vision graying at the edges. But Webb's rifle spoke in response as the heavy bullet catching Crane's center mass and slamming him back against the explosive cache. The sheriff's eyes went wide with shock and pain as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Guess I finally found something. Something I couldn't buy or steal or kill my way out of." Crane whispered, then pitched forward onto his face. The mine continued to shake and rumble as Webb and his deputy helped Jasper toward the surface. Behind them, secondary explosions brought down entire sections of tunnel, sealing off the deeper workings forever. By the time they reached the main entrance, half the mountain was collapsing in on itself, creating a man-made earthquake that would be felt for miles around. They emerged into the storm-lashed night, just as the final explosions tore through Gray Butte Mine. The wooden headframe toppled like a falling tree, crushing equipment and buildings in its path. Flames shot from the mine entrance like dragon's breath, illuminating the destruction in hellish red light. Nora was waiting with May's medical supplies, her face tight with worry, as she saw the blood soaking through Jasper's shirt. "How bad?" she asked May as they laid him on a makeshift stretcher. "Bad enough," May replied grimly, cutting away fabric to examine the wound. "But he'll live assuming we can get him proper treatment." As May worked to stop the bleeding, Marshal Webb surveyed the destruction that had once been Gray Butte Mine. The corrupt empire that had ruled Wolf's Crossing through fear and violence was literally buried under tons of rock, its secrets entombed forever in the mountain's depths. "Is it over?" Nora asked quietly. Webb nodded slowly. "The conspiracy's finished. Kincaid will face federal charges, and anyone else involved will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But rebuilding trust, rebuilding this community, that's going to take time." Behind them, the mine continued to burn a funeral pyre for Sheriff Ellis Crane and the corrupt system he'd helped create. The storm was beginning to subside, and in the distance, the first hints of dawn painted the eastern horizon with hope. But for Jasper, consciousness was fading as shock and blood loss took their toll. His last clear thought before darkness claimed him was of Luke, not the guilt and grief that had haunted him for 5 years, but something closer to peace. His brother's death had finally been avenged, and the conspiracy that killed him was buried forever in the depths of Gray Butte Mine. 6 months later, Wolf's Crossing bore little resemblance to the corrupt town that had harbored such dark secrets. The burned ruins of Gray Butte Mine had been cleared away, replaced by a memorial garden where families could remember loved ones lost to industrial accidents that were anything but accidental. Jasper stood in that garden on a crisp autumn morning, his right hand still weak but functional enough to hold Nora's as they read the names carved into the granite memorial stone. Luke Boone's name was there, along with Thomas Sloan and dozens of others whose deaths had been used to hide theft and fraud. "Do you think they'd be proud of what we did?" Nora asked softly. "I think they'd be proud that someone finally told the truth," Jasper replied, "even if it took longer than it should have." The trials had been swift but thorough. Silas Kincaid received 20 years in territorial prison for fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Rhett Coulter and his surviving gang members received similar sentences. Abigail Sloan, her cooperation with authorities and ultimate choice to help them earning consideration, received 5 years and was required to make restitution to victims' families. Tommy Hart had been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing and elected as Wolf's Crossing's new sheriff by overwhelming margin. His first act had been hiring Emmett Boone as a deputy, giving the young man a chance to channel his energy toward law enforcement rather than crime. Dr. May Hollister became the town's first elected mayor, her practical wisdom and medical background making her a natural choice for leadership. One of her first initiatives was establishing a mining safety board with real authority to shut down dangerous operations. The new Wolf's Crossing attracted different kinds of businesses, farms, ranches, and small manufacturing that didn't depend on extracting wealth from the earth at the cost of human lives. The railroad maintained its depot, but the town's economy diversified beyond mining into more sustainable enterprises. "Mrs. Boone," a voice called from behind them. Nora turned, still getting used to her married name after their wedding 3 months earlier. Marshal Webb approached with a leather folder in his hands and a satisfied expression on his weathered face. Final restitution payments came through from the territorial government. Webb said, handing her the folder, "Enough to compensate every family that lost someone to Kincaid's operation, plus funds to establish that school you and May have been planning." The school had been Nora's idea, a place where children could learn without fear, where education meant opportunity rather than just survival. May had donated the land, Jasper had volunteered his construction skills, and the entire community had contributed labor and materials. "Any word on other mining operations?" Jasper asked. Webb nodded grimly. "The investigation you folks started has spread across 3 territories. We've found similar fraud schemes at mines in Colorado, Nevada, and Montana. Turns out Kincaid was part of a much larger network of corruption. Your courage in exposing Grey Butte has saved hundreds of lives and millions of dollars in stolen money." As Webb departed to continue his territorial rounds, Jasper and Nora walked toward the construction site where their new home was taking shape. It was a modest house by city standards, but spacious enough for the family they hoped to raise and positioned to overlook the memorial garden where Luke's sacrifice would always be remembered. "Do you ever regret staying?" Nora asked as they watched Emmett and several other young men framing the roof. "Never," Jasper replied without hesitation. "This is where we're needed. This is where we can do the most good." The truth was more complex than that simple answer suggested. There were nights when Jasper still woke from dreams of burning mines and gunfire in dark tunnels. Times when his damaged right hand reminded him of all the violence he'd witnessed and participated in. Moments when the weight of responsibility for rebuilding a community felt overwhelming. But there were also mornings like this one when the air was clean and the future seemed bright with possibility. When Nora's smile could chase away any lingering shadows and the sound of children playing in the memorial garden promised that new generations would grow up free from the corruption that had once ruled their parents' lives. As the sun climbed higher over Wolf's Crossing, Jasper pulled his wife closer and watched Emmett work alongside men who'd once been his enemies. The boy had grown into the kind of man Luke might have become: honest, hard-working, committed to justice, without being consumed by vengeance. He would have liked seeing this, Nora said, following his gaze. Luke always believed people could change if they had the right reasons. Jasper agreed. Guess he was right about that, like he was right about most things. In the distance, a train whistle announced the afternoon arrival from the territorial capital. New families continued to arrive in Wolf's Crossing, drawn by reports of honest government and economic opportunity. Each new arrival represented another chance for the community to prove that justice and prosperity could coexist, that a town's wealth didn't have to be built on the graves of the innocent. As they walked toward home, Jasper's hand found the silver pocket watch in his vest. Luke's watch returned to the family where it belonged. The timepiece had kept perfect time through all the violence and chaos, marking the hours and minutes of lives lost and lives saved, of corruption exposed and justice restored. Time enough for healing. Time enough for building. Time enough for new beginnings in a place where the past informed the future without destroying it. The sun was setting over Wolf's Crossing as Jasper and Nora reached their partially built home, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that spoke of endings and beginnings of blood spilled and hope reborn. In the memorial garden behind them, Luke Boone's name may have caught the last light of day, a reminder that some sacrifices echo through time, and that the price of justice once paid can purchase freedom for generations yet unborn. And in the growing darkness, the lights of Wolf's Crossing began to twinkle like stars, each one representing a family, a dream, a chance for something better than what had come before. The town slept peacefully, protected by honest law and built on foundations of truth rather than greed. It was exactly the kind of place Luke Boone would have wanted to call home.